Hello everyone, welcome here, welcome back to the book show. And we're recording here at the third floor on the place in Phuket, Thailand, right next to Patong Beach. Yes, there's videos about that too. We got the place about 3 years ago, and it was in a horrible condition because it was closed for about 5 years before that. And it had to be completely renovated, and so we did. And if you're interested in seeing how we renovated it from really run down to what it's now, you're more than welcome. I'll leave a link here for the YouTube channel on that. I'll leave that in for you. And today we want to speak about Codename Vet 101. Now, there's a reason why I use that name. My editor, right in the beginning, when Rebecca wasn't on the scene yet, I had a Vietnam vet who's a friend of mine, doesn't matter what his name is. And he volunteered, he read my Mean Streets books and we became good friends. And then I started writing the GMJ novels. And he said, look, if you need somebody to read them for you, he's a very diplomatic man. So I said, yeah, fine. By all means, please do so. And so he did it. And you know what? He edited about 50 books, or 45 or something, 44 by the time which Rebecca took over. And never asked me money, never did anything, just did it, made a few suggestions here and there. And I'm quite sure that now and then I wrote something in the books which he, as an American citizen, would have taken offense to. But not a word ever. He was just a very kind man. So a great thank you to Alex. He really did a good job, and he served in Vietnam two tours of duty. Lost an eye in Vietnam as well, and thereafter he did quite a bit of other things. A very fascinating man, and because of him, I decided I will call the book Codename Vet 101. Why 101? That's the unit he was serving in, 101 Division in Vietnam, which I believe is a paratroopers. Great guy, really a great guy, but I'm not going to put any pictures of him here for obvious reasons. But anyway, so Vet 101 is an interesting book, and it's a long book. It's about 500 pages, but I have to say the last 50 pages is actually an addendum. So it's not part of a story. So the actual book's about 460 pages, which is still long. So a substantial book. And the addendum is about that 2017 Niger attack where 4, I think, Green Berets actually died. And there was an entire outcry about it. And I remember Donald Trump was actually waiting for the bodies to return or something. And then there was, of course, the liberal press, the mainstream assholes. They went on and on about it. And they I believe at one stage, the widow of one of the fallen was honored in Congress. And a lot of, again, these horrible mainstream people, and of course, had a lot to say about that. Nasty things, very, very nasty things, actually, attacking a widow without reason. So I do mention all of this. Why? Because no one else will remember it. It is a sad thing in life that if there's any kind of terrorist attack or whatever, 3-4 days later, people forgot about it. Now, 9/11 is probably different because I think people will always remember that, like Pearl Harbor. But normally speaking, and it was also shocking is that no US senator or congressman could even tell us, could even show us on a map where Niger is. I don't know. Yeah, don't know. And yet you have these people all over. They're in Africa, and I also discuss, of course, Africa Command. Yeah, let's roll our eyes and have a minute of silence for the pathetic Africa Command or shape. They're really not good. And this is one of the incidents I use in my books actually to describe to you how bad they really are. About counterinsurgency, they are pathetic. And there were all sorts of crap which came out afterwards on exactly what happened there. At Niger, I know what happened because I was briefed on it. So I do write an entire story. Well, it's not a story, it's like a report on what happened at Niger in 2017. So if you're interested in that, you can read it. I also expanded a bit on it in intelligence briefing, which I also looked at it. Why? Because there's lessons to be learned. But sadly, no lessons were learned. And yeah, you can expect the same thing to happen time after time after time because they just don't know what they're doing. Which is actually amazing because up to about Vietnam, the US Marine Corps was actually quite good at counterinsurgency. They were having all these colonial type of wars going on in the Philippines, other places. Yes, lots of war crimes were committed, of course. What do you expect? Second beast of the Bible. But they were fairly good at it, actually. They did do well. And so they had the skills. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, you hear about Indian fighters and things like that, and I don't mean anything discriminatory when I use that word. And so, yeah, they should be able to do it, but they can't. There's an over-reliance on air support and as well as modern equipment. They don't go out and search for the enemy anymore. But whatever, they can't track either. They wanted easy war. They wanted coke and pie war. Is how somebody described it to me. Anyway, so what's happening actually in the book? Now, our heroes, Angelique Dawson and mates, they're actually in Tanzania. They are there to assist the Israeli team. Her sister-in-law, as it turns out, Deborah Arik. And they have two missions where there's two things they want to do. The first thing is they want to capture an upgraded Soviet-era ZSU-234, which is also known as the Shilka. It's basically a self-propelled, radar-guided anti-aircraft weapon. It's got 4 cannons. It's like mounted on an old tank chassis. And this thing is deadly. It's really deadly. You will not come close. That's why I always laugh when I see especially the US Air Force and the Yanks, the Americans, they like this idea of this aircraft of theirs with this big 7-barrel cannon. And then it would come in low and fast and it would actually attack the tanks and just shoot them out just like that. Yeah, of course. Which is World War II tactics, that is what they did against, ironically, the Soviet army. The Germans were quite good at that, shooting out tanks like that. But you know what? In today's environment, I don't think you will get close enough to even start shooting. You'll be dead long before you get there. And one of this is the Shilka. Now, I do describe where the Shilka comes from and what happens with the Shilka and how it changed through the years, how they tried different type of guns on it, or cannon, automatic cannon. But trust me, this thing is deadly, especially in counterinsurgency. If one of those things starts shooting, it is, as they say, the leaves fall off the trees. True. After such a shooting, if there's enough shooting, the trees around you will not have any leaves left because the terrorists, I'm very happy to say to you, used to aim high. They would shoot automatic, the barrel would lift, and then they shoot it mostly over your head. It saved quite a lot of South Africans, I would say. But anyway, this one is very special. It's got an upgrade, which is why the Israelis actually want it. And we call it the Giovanni Racer update. It's just a name I use. There is a child called Giovanni, of a friend of my late wife, of Melissa, and she was very kind to Melissa, especially when she was dying. And so I thought, let me honor this woman for her kindness towards my late wife. And so I called the upgrade after a child, the Giovanni upgrade. But of course, there's no real such thing. There are upgrades, of course, but there's no real, it's not called the Giovanni. But whatever, it's a nice name and good luck to her at the child, and why not? So anyway, They want to get hold of this thing because it's got different software now on it. And to capture enemy weapons, of course, is not unheard of. It's actually quite common. I mean, you always try to do that, which is also why there are strict instructions that if you are about to be captured or you're about to surrender, you have to destroy your weapons, so it cannot be used against you. Just interesting. Just last week, I made an episode. It would have been out already on Legacy Conversations. Because this video, even though today is, I think, the 2nd of July, in fact, this video will not be out until 17 February. So it's many, many months ago I made this other video. And it's about the operations of the G5 cannon, as well as the G6, and of course the MLRS, the multiple launch rocket systems of the South African Army, which is fantastically deadly. It is really deadly. And so I had two people there, great men, great warriors. One is retired Major General Koos Bom Laubscher, as well as retired Colonel Pierre Franken, who became famous in 3-2 Battalion Support Group. And these are artillerists. I mean, they're from Artillery Corps. And we made 4 episodes of them so far. We'll make more. I've got no doubts about it. Going to make more. And so anyway, I asked them a question. I said, look, did you ever have to abandon your guns during the entire 23 years of war? Because it's a bit of a shameful thing if your guns are captured, you know, in the military circles. And so they said, no, never, ever. And they never once had to abandon their guns. They had to run at times, you know, they had to move back because air superiority was lost to the Cuban and Russian and Angolan MiG-23s. We simply didn't have an aircraft to take them on. We tried in the last 2 years of the war, and then the war ended just by the time that the Cheetahs came online. And the Cheetah definitely would have taken on the MiG-23 and probably won in a dogfight. Now, our problem was lack of air-to-air missiles. But there's an episode about that as well, where you can have one of the commanders, 2nd Squadron, 2 Squadron, South African Air Force, actually speaking about the Cheetah C model. He's standing there talking about it. Guys, if you haven't seen those videos, please go look at it, because it's, as I always say to you, there's a lot of interaction between the GMJ novels and the Legacy Conversations channel. Even though the books were written long before the channel actually appeared, there's only 2 books which were written afterwards, which is codename Crocodile and codename Snake 606. But what's fascinating to me, and I say this in most of the videos, is that yes, you wrote a novel, and of course I knew what I was writing, and I knew what I was talking about. I had some experience in it, and a lot of research in behind the books. And I would sit there and I would listen to special forces or fighter pilots or other people just talking, and they got no clue about the books. I mean, I'm not that well known as an author. In fact, I'm not known as at all, which is also good, whatever, the way it is. And they would confirm what I was writing in the book. And to me, that was really, really something, you know. It was really good. It's good for an author when that happens. And so they confirmed we never lost a gun, artillery piece, which is fantastic. I was glad to hear about that. Okay, but as always in the GMJ books, it's you have what they say they want to do, and then behind it they have another thing going. And that's very typical also in the espionage world. You always have something, yes, you want to do that actually, but that's not really what you're doing. You know what I mean? There's always double games and triple games and all sorts of things. And the problem here is, Angelique Dawson, of course, being a spy master, simply will not tell Foxtrot and Hillsong exactly what she's up to. It's a recurring thing in every single book, because that's how she was. That's exactly how she operated. And Well, as she would tell you, it's actually for your own good, because if you're captured and tortured, you can't actually betray your mate. But on the other hand, she she liked she liked having secrets. She really enjoyed that. It was part of her personality. Still is. I don't know if she's still alive or not. I have a fairly good idea, but I'm not telling you. And so they figured out that there's something else happening with the Israelis, because uh, they discover there's two companies of Israeli Special Forces actually in Nairobi in Kenya. They're waiting there at the airport for combined operations with the Kenyan army. Now you find a lot of them actually in Africa. And about a year ago, 3-4 years ago, Israeli paratroopers were doing an exercise in Norway, where they jumped to the Norwegian army in a NATO exercise. You have to ask why. What for? Why would a Middle Eastern country be doing this in Africa or in Norway? Or it makes no sense. But whatever, from a political viewpoint, of course, it makes absolutely sense. But from a military viewpoint, intelligence viewpoint, makes no sense whatsoever. And I was laughing just a week ago. I was listening to a former CIA agent speaking. Great guy. I still want to invite him here to the show. Yeah, but we're so small that I don't think he would be interested. Perhaps Legacy, which is a bigger show. And he always said that, and this is true. He says there's no such thing as a Mossad agent meeting anybody, whether it's the CIA or South African Secret Service or whatever, without trying to recruit him. If they find out there's just a touch of Jewish blood in you, or there's some kind of sympathy, they will definitely make you an offer. Yeah, they did that with me too, but I never accepted that. Having said that, I'm not the enemy at all. If you read this book especially, it's a very touching book, because one of the subjects we are dealing with is in fact the Holocaust, both in South Africa as well as in Germany, actually more Poland to be honest, but the Second World War one. There's a lot of things you don't know about that. There's a lot of things in the history books which you don't know, and there's a lot of deniers, of course, which I'm definitely not one of them. So it is very possible that other things are happening in the background, and indeed there was something which happened at Entebbe with a successful rescue of July 1976. We're going to look at that in detail as well. We did look at it in Wrangler, but here we go a bit further. And then there's also a camp guard or something, a kapu as we call it. It's actually an overseer from a Second World War, which they found there in Africa, and they wanted to snatch him. So we do speak about Operation Wrath of God and all those things as well. Surprising conclusions which we come to. So what started this was actually two things. In the first place, we found out that Chinese and Russian airborne forces have changed their pistol calibers. Now, in other words, their sidearms to the NATO 9x19mm parabellum round. Yeah, not like Makarov or Tokarev or whatever. They're now using the Western NATO round. Why? Why? Guys, why do you think they changed that? Because it's a massive change. I mean, you're talking about millions of rounds and tens of thousands of firearms, which has to be either be made new or be adapted. This instance, it was made new. Really, really good looking firearms they have now. But why did they do that? Why would they change to the Western one? It's actually crucial. The intelligence which came out here is actually crucial, because my question to you is, where do you find airborne forces normally? Behind enemy lines. That's where you find them. And therefore it makes sense to have at least a pistol caliber where you can reload with captured ammunition. So who's the enemies of the Chinese and the Russians? Who? Oh yeah, that would be NATO, huh? So now China and Russian airborne forces are using the same caliber. Yeah, interesting. It also shows that they don't really think that NATO, military, US, but you will be able to operate behind the enemy lines, behind their lines. And that I totally agree with too. So that's very interesting because it's a warning, which of course was ignored. But having captured enemy equipment is not new, you know. After Yom Kippur, I think the Israelis had more than 800 captured Egyptian tanks. I think they formed an entire brigade or division almost with it. So we look at that as well. So that was the one reason, this change of caliber. I wanted to bring that out to warn. And then the second reason why I wrote this book, now besides honoring my friend, the editor, is that in 2017 also something dreadful happened in Afghanistan. At that stage, just before the US ran away. And of course the Brits and whoever else, coalition forces. Yeah, you ran away. You abandoned those people. Yeah, you abandoned them. What can I say? Of course, we knew you would. But I didn't know it would be that bad. I didn't expect to see the scenes which I saw there. I really didn't expect that. I was thinking in terms of an orderly one. But sure as God, Joe Biden, what did you do? Vietnam, 1975, once again. Yeah, here we go. And of course, you would have forgotten about that because people don't remember. But your enemy will never forget it. Please remember that. Your enemy is not as stupid as you think they are. And so they remember this with great fondness. And it gives them a lot of hope. With every reason in the book, of course. It was a disaster. There's no other words for it. A disaster. And again, what happened? You left behind how many $1 billion of equipment? Oh yeah. And you think perhaps that equipment is going to be used against you in the future? Is that possible? Yes, absolutely. So we're now at the stage where American taxpayers has paid money for weapons to kill their own boys and girls with. Yeah. Great. Congratulate you. But in 2017, something happened. There was a Taliban website or something, and they started displaying US Army Special Forces equipment. Where did they get it? Well, they took it from the bodies. What else? And they had like a FN SCAR rifle there, or SCAR, I call it a SCAR. They have one of these, or they had this normal scopes on it, as well as the night vision. They had all of those things. And that was also very shocking to see, because that meant that Special Forces lost so badly that they had to retreat. I wouldn't say run away, retreat. You see how this gets back to 2017 Niger. Same story, but there they were just wiped out because they were basically left behind. The troops ran away. And they tried to fight, but they had no chance whatsoever. And of course, their weapons were taken, their bodies were mutilated, their lots of things happened, their uniforms, even their boots were stolen. And so suddenly the Taliban had this kind of weapons. And of course, in Iraq, we've seen them with ISIS, we've seen them with US-made ex-Iraqi army Abrams tanks. Yeah, we saw them with Humvees, with tanks. Man, and after Afghanistan fell, we saw them flying around with helicopters and all sorts of things, which were actually Russian helicopters, but still, yeah. I cannot understand for the life of me, why didn't you just blow up everything when you ran out of Afghanistan? Why didn't you then come with an airstrike since you love it so much? Why did you just leave everything there? What? We have a saying in Afrikaans, "Daar's trane in my oë en snot in my neus," or something. I can't even translate this to you, but it's a way of saying you're utterly astonished. Utterly astonished. It shows a lack of military professionalism. It shows cowardice. What else? Cowardice. What else can it be? Because you ran so quickly you couldn't even do that. You couldn't even take 10 minutes per aircraft just to put a little, explosive device on it, just blow it. No, couldn't do that. No, man, I had to run. Yeah. Reminds me of Operation Eagle Claw in 1980. When you ran away so quickly, but you left, I think 2 or 3 Sikorsky helicopters just standing there idling until the Iranians arrived about 8 hours later. 8 hours. Yeah. And then they arrived and they just being, at that stage, a totally US Air Force themselves and a modern in 1980. They just took off and they probably still using those helicopters, huh? Yeah. So anyway, so there's a Taliban patrol and that night they got ambushed. But it wasn't a normal ambush. It was not like you expect an ambush to be. It was different. Okay, so what was different? What happened? What was different in this ambush? Now, normally when we speak about an ambush, we expect a heavy burst of gunfire and then a lot of gunfire actually, especially in the first moments. That's what you expect. This one was totally different. This patrol of the Afghan army was ambushed in the way that they were there, and then suddenly they started dying, shot in the head one by one. Yeah, one after the other. They started dying. Why? Because the Taliban actually had night vision equipment, and they had this Western Special Forces equipment, and they were actually quite good in using it, so they just started shooting these men dead one by one. That's your problem. That's another lesson which I was trying to tell you in NATO and everywhere else is that, you don't understand that if you have night vision equipment and your enemy don't, well, then you actually have a great advantage, don't you? Yeah. But what if the other army also have night vision equipment and probably better than yours? What happens then? And that's exactly what's going to happen when you face a country like Russia or China. When you take on BRICS, which you will do. And of course, I hope you don't. But if you do, we'll see if I'm right or wrong. I see you losing. Yeah. I don't see you winning. So anyway, you probably know that already. That's why you're trying to take them on one by one. First let us destroy Russia. Yeah. Let's do that through Ukraine. Okay, let's try to destroy Iran. Let's do it through Israel, and then when Israel saw their asses, we will come and rescue them. Yeah. You think those people in Moscow and Beijing can't figure this out, guys? Are you that arrogant? You really think you're that smart that no one else can figure you out? Huh? How many times must I explain your techniques to you, your battle plans, the way you're doing business? How many times must I explain that to you? And if I know it, don't you think perhaps that these other guys will probably also know it and know how to counter you? Yeah? Huh? So anyway, of course, when this 2017 attack by the Taliban on that Afghan patrol, you would have thought this would be actually headline news in the mainstream media, but no, there was almost nothing to say about it except that they think that this equipment came from Russia. Now remember, just the year before 2016, we had Russia meddling and collusion sort of shite, which turned out to be exactly that word, shite. It never happened. Donald Trump is not in the pay of Moscow, he's in the pay of Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. But actually, no, I'm wrong. I apologize. Besides that, now, have we not seen him kneeling in a Catholic church? Huh? Guy was supposed to be Protestant. Well, why are you kneeling in a Catholic church in front of idols? Tell me, Donald. Come, Daddy. I want to know. Tell me. I know why. We know why. We're going to see it before the end of his term or just after it, if he survives that long. And I hope he do. Then, hope he does. Then, he's going to be a Knight of Malta or a Knight of this or a Knight of that. Read Oath of Evil, find out who controls them. And then you will find out The truth of the matter is that Russia actually, until the story with Ukraine, actually had a very good relationship with the West from a military viewpoint as well as from an intelligence viewpoint. They would warn. And they would at times receive warnings from the West about terrorist attacks. They saw the jihadi movements against Christians, and Russia is a Christian country, not the US. There's nothing Christian about the US. The US is a Christian evangelism, Christian Zionism. That's bullshit. It's not in the Bible. And this is, well, go and become a Catholic, man. Go and sun worship. That's what you're doing. You're under the influence of Satan. That's why you're the second beast. Yeah, that's exactly why. And I know there's a lot of people who get very annoyed with me when I say these things. You know, I don't care. It's the truth. It's biblical. It comes out of the Bible. I think it's bloody well high time that people realize that there is an Antichrist, yes, and he sits in Rome. I mean, the Protestant leaders 400 or 500 years ago were saying this outright. They had no problems with it. And then suddenly all of you got too ashamed to say the truth aloud. Huh? Why do you think you're a Protestant? What does Protestant mean? To protest. Are you protesting? No. You're following. What are you doing? You're going to church on a Sunday. We start, what's that? The mark of the beast. How many times must I repeat this to you? That's the Bible. That is the Bible. Whether you like it or not, it's still the truth. So yeah, I don't mind calling the US the second beast, because that's the only way you can actually understand why they're acting the way they do. There is no other way to explain them, unless you want to start saying, well, they are a rogue nation, they are total, like, outside the scopes of the law, the rules are for them to break and for you to follow. Yeah, all those things, but that doesn't come back to why are they like that? Why are they so arrogant beyond belief? Where does this come from? It's not biblical. It cannot be. So there's your answer. And then, of course, we know who's the first beast, the Catholic system. Must I say again? Not the Catholic person. System. How many times must I repeat myself on that too? But anyway, Russia was actually assisting. Yeah, they were providing logistical support and supply routes. And they started with, in 2001 already, they started assisting there in Afghanistan. And of course, you don't read that in the Western press either, huh? No. What did Russia do? Full-scale invasion. Full scale. Yeah, 120,000 men. Yeah, more than 700,000 fighting at the moment, but that 120,000 was so. Yeah. I wonder if these politicians even realize how flippin' ridiculous they come over to us. We sit on the outside just watching. You know, it's amazing. And you know what's even more amazing? There's a lot more of you who actually thinks like me than most of you who actually hates me. A lot more. We're surprised at the support we're getting. But that's fascinating too, because the GMJ books and Marvel books as well, you either really like those books or you hate them. There's no middle ground here. You're either going to love them or you're going to hate them. It's exactly the way it is. But anyway, at the end of the day, the Taliban, as we know, they did win. And it was not done with Russian equipment. No, it was done with captured US equipment. And not only captured, we know that the Afghan army was so corrupt, even after 20 years of what? What do I hear? Western training, yeah. Helped you a lot, huh? They were so corrupt that they just sold it or gave it away or just joined them. You know what they said when you talk to the junior people, the non-commissioned officers, the warrant officers, up to field grade officers, those who served in Afghanistan and Iraq, they will tell you exactly what I told you now. They're so corrupt that they cannot be saved, and it was a total waste of time from the beginning. They know the truth. They fully understand it, and they're angry. They're angry about their sacrifices, which was basically in vain. Because you can't even show me what you achieved. You achieved fuck all, nothing. You just made a lot of people very, very rich, especially those people like Blackwater. But then, of course, that guy was very rich before he started. And, the military industrial complex got extremely rich. And America, where you now? What do I hear? $55 trillion of debt. Huh? Huh? Yeah, yeah. Wonder when that's going to implode. But anyway, let's leave it like that. I was just saying to you why I wrote the book. It was those reasons. First reason was, then also another theory, then also something which repeats a lot in my books, of course, is concentration camps of the Second Anglo-Boer War, which some people now call the South African War. Yeah, whatever. I know it as the Second Anglo-Boer War. That is where Winston Churchill, that damn arch liar, I'll make an episode on him too, don't worry. I think I'll make one on Niger ambush too, when I'm done with this and I feel the need to do it, which I don't at this stage, but let's see. Make a special episode here and there. And that is where the British Army actually started the concentration camps in the modern era. Now, it happened before that as well, but this is personal. This is personal to every South African listening here, because that started apartheid. And also, they murdered 1 out of every 3 people who came there. And most of the people who went there was like women, children, and many black people as well, because they were like not slaves at all. There were no slavery in South Africa for 70 years by then, I would say. Or even more, yeah, probably around 65, 70 years. So it was 2 generations ago. But a lot of the people working on the farms and so were also just dragged off to the concentration camps. Many of them were actually friends with the white people. Yeah, the liberals. Can you understand? Friendship between a black man and a white man in South Africa? Huh? No, of course not. No. I had many black friends there while I was in the police. We're all together in the same uniform. If you look at 3-2 Battalion at Legacy Conversations, you will find all of them who served there talking with great admiration and love to their black soldiers. When you talk to the black guys, and they talk with great love and affection to their white comrades. Yeah. I know about one officer who spoke English. He couldn't speak English that well. He spoke Portuguese better than English. But he spoke in English so that his men could understand what he was saying. And then, of course, there were these people. Yeah, you have to go and learn to speak English. Yeah, you're all banned. All right. Don't come back to the show. No. But you're so shallow, you're so idiotically stupid, you don't realize why that guy was doing it. Huh? You don't know. He was willing to take this kind of, utterances from idiots like you, so that his men could understand him when he brings honor to them. Yeah. Even though a normal person would say, well, you know what? I'm grateful for you at least trying to speak English. I understand why you're doing it. Congratulations, you're a good man. That's what normal people would say. But that is people who actually have brain power, who can actually think a bit. Which sadly is a lack of this. But anyway, between 1901 and 1902, these concentration camps were created in South Africa. Now, there are people who say they went there voluntarily. Well, the British Army followed the scorched earth policy. So they would arrive at the farms, they would burn everything, shoot everything, burn everything down, and then drag these people off to the camps, or they would leave them there. And then the women and children, because the husbands and brothers and men were all fighting. They were out in the commandos, which was like highly irregular cavalry. They would be moving around, so they wouldn't be there to protect them against wild animals and roving black tribes who were taking advantage of this and attacking them isolated places. Yeah, these things happened. And of course, a Brit would sit there with snot in his nose and tears in his eyes. Yeah, I just translated that Afrikaans thing for you. Don't care. No, don't care. And if you think that no rapes of an Afrikaner woman and even black women took place there at the concentration camps, I'll think again. No, there's books written about this. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, obviously. I mean, you couldn't keep your little pricks in your pants even then. So for the Afrikaner, this is a very great deal. So I mention it in all my books. I mean, Rebecca just laughs when she edits the books and says, yeah, here we go again, Chris. I say, yeah, well, we have to talk about it. And I think part of my anger is there's no apology ever. And of course, no such thing as paying people out for injuries and suffering. No such thing. You know, the Jewish Holocaust, I think, has been paid out 6 times. Might be wrong, but multiple times people were paid. Of course, it was also a scam, according to many Jewish scholars and books. Because the Holocaust, I'm sad to say, became something like a bit of a business. And not over millions and millions and hundreds of millions of dollars paid out. Billions even, very few of that money actually went to the victims. Very little. Most of the times we would go to museums or places like that, and then the directors and the people working there is cashing in. But the actual victims got very little to nothing. Sadly so. But we do write about this in this book as well. But because I wrote all of those about the concentration camps, I had quite a few letters arriving by email saying to me, you know, there's a lot of people making apologies, which is bullshit. The apologies is just bullshit. And one guy said to me that, look, these British soldiers cannot be held responsible simply because they're following orders. Yes, they were following orders. But tell me, idiot, were those legal orders? And by that time, you were a signature to the Geneva and Hague Conventions. Yes, you were. And you know that if you then put people in a concentration camp, you actually have to take care of it. Huh? Did you take care of it? So well that only 1 out of 3 died. You know, that's like being in court. It's like being in court. I've heard this. And I must say the presiding judge almost exploded in anger. Where this guy says to this woman, he says, Madam, are you not glad that you were raped, according to you anyway, by my client who's a white man? You know, it would have been worse if it was a black man. Guys, you don't say such things in court. You don't say such things. So you cannot say to me, look, we took so well care of you, but only 1 out of 3 died. It's still 1/3, you know. Not 1 out of 10. Not 1 out of 100. No, 1 out of 3. 1 out of 3. They died. Yeah. There's really no excuse for this behavior. All what you really should do is just shut up and apologize. And that's all you need to do. And that will take away quite a bit of the anger. Because as I said to you, that started apartheid, because at that stage apparently the Afrikaner nation and the black nations around them were fairly much the same in numbers. And people had a lot of children in those days. 10, 12 children wasn't unheard of. And because the white people had access to medical doctors and things which the black people sadly didn't always, you can make the argument that should this war not have taken place, the populations would have been basically the same, or even more. There might have been more white people than black. Same as in Israel right now, where you have more Jews than Arabs or Christians. So it doesn't really matter if everybody's got to vote, doesn't it? Because if you vote according to your religion or your race, then guess what? Guess who's going to be in charge? But then this did happen, and the entire generation was lost, and the black people just grew in numbers until the whites were totally outnumbered. And then, of course, came the fear of if you gave in to a one man, one vote, then of course you're going to lose political power immediately and economic power virtually assured. After that, you lose it. And then what's going to happen? Yeah, well, we saw what happened. But that doesn't make apartheid a good thing at all. I'm against apartheid too, by the way. There's no way in the world you can defend it. You cannot. And I'm not. I'm just telling you what this caused. what these concentration camps caused. So in Codename Vet 101, we look at the South African concentration camps, and then we look at the Jewish Holocaust. And of course, after this book, I also wrote the When and Where books, which you really have to read, about the Jewish army rescuing the trapped Jews in occupied France, occupied by the Nazis during World War II, which is a fascinating story which many Israelis don't even know, and definitely very few Jews know about, which is sad. And then you will find out quite a bit more about especially Switzerland, Swineland. Yahweh cost at least 30,000 Jews, 30,000 Jews their lives, because they wouldn't allow them in. Yahweh were doing their best not to get Jews in. Yeah, they did take Jews in, it's true, but very reluctantly, and they almost had to be bribed. So yeah, if I hold the swine in contempt, and I do in utter contempt, then, you know, I've got very good reasons why I do that. But the fact is that Germany paid retribution, and they apologized many, many times for these crimes which were committed. So anyway, we look at that, and it's a very, very touching how we look at it. We also describe to you the 6 million Jews, because there's a lot of people out there who say it wasn't 6 million. And they would point out, and it's correctly, that the 6 million figure comes from one of the camp commanders who just said during interrogation it was 6 million, and they left it like that. But in fact, the Germans, being Germans, kept very good records on how many people actually were transported there by train. And also the Jews in many times had to actually buy their own train tickets. And so there's records. So we do know how many people were taken to which camp when. And we do know how many came out of it alive. So that's how we know, plus minus, how many Jews died. And of course, it wasn't only Jews. That's the other misnomer there. Not all the camps were death camps. So we go into quite a lot of details about the Holocaust and what we know about it. And it's disturbing reading, to be honest, but you can quite understand why the Israelis and lots of Jews are still angry about it, even though there were apologies and compensation paid. You can fully understand that, and you can also understand why they say never again, it will never happen again. And there might be deeper things going on here than was planned to create Israel. But that's what the occult world is saying, actually. They are saying that. You know, they created this to make sure that Israel can come into being. And that shows the evilness of these people, you know, that they don't give a shit how many millions has died under the most horrible conditions as well. You know, it's really, it's horrible. But anyway, something happened at the Entebbe hostage rescue of 4th of July 1976. And we did look at it in Codename Wrangler as well. But Entebbe stands out. And basically what happened was that Air France aircraft with 248 passengers aboard, they were taking off from Athens, which is where the hijackers actually got on board. And they started flying around with a captured plane. And there were 2 members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLO. They're sort of gone now, we don't hear much about them. As well as 2 members of the West German Revolutionary Cells. Now that is fascinating, because here you saw for the first time, which I know about, and I might be wrong, stand to be corrected, you see actually terrorist organizations starting working together. Even though they have very different views. I mean, the West Germans have different political views than the Palestinians, huh? And yet they're working together. So who's controlling them? It's happening in Africa again, in Sub-Saharan Africa. Perhaps I should write a book about that too. So anyway, it was captured, and then they divided the aircraft into 2 groups. So they made sure that the Jews and Israelis on one side and the non-Jews on the other side. So how do you know a guy's a Jew? Well, you drop his pants, man. You see if everything is still there. If he's circumcised, then he has to be either American or a Jew. Yeah. It saved my ass once in France. It's described, I think, in code name Foxtrot. I'm not sure it is. Might have been. I could prove I'm not an Arab. Yeah, yeah. I still have every part, That's why. But since the 2010 mall attack in Kenya, they do it differently now. They will ask you questions about the Quran, and if you cannot answer, they kill you. Yeah, just like that. And so 148 of these people on the aircraft are actually not Jewish, or they thought they were not, and so they just let them go. So they've flown out to Paris by another aircraft. So 94 of them remained with the air crew, and they were then put on a guard in a disused airport building. It still stands and it still has bullet holes on it. You can go and look at it. And Idi Amin, that fat Uganda's dictator, he actually arrived with his Mercedes, to play the fool there, propaganda purposes, blah, blah, blah. Do you know Donald Trump? Tusk? What's it? What's that idiot's name there at NATO? Not Tusk, is it? Something else. The Dutch guy. I can't remember. He's so unimportant. Yeah. Did you know that Idi Amin was also called Daddy? You know it, Daddy. Yeah, I'll say the one thing which Idi Amin actually has in common with the US military is the amount of medals. Yeah. Interesting. Also, of course, he declared himself a member of a special air service. They don't recognize that, by the way. Why should they? Anyway, we all know the story is when that Israeli special forces arrived and they rescued these people. They went in the hard way. They just stormed in. They shouted in Hebrew for everybody to lie down. There was one French Jew who didn't quite understand what they were saying because he was not that fluent in Hebrew, and so they shot him dead when he stood up. There's a lot to learn about this. It's called the Entebbe Principle. So if you listen to my series of lectures on surviving as a hostage, which is available, you will hear me speak about this quite often. Because that's a lesson we learned from Entebbe, which means that if you are ever captured and you're with Russians or Chinese or whatever, and they suddenly just lie down, man, you don't ask questions, you lie down with them. Because something is happening which you don't understand. But at the end of the day, all the hijackers were killed. 3 hostages were killed, as well as 45 Ugandan soldiers. Strange that nobody ever mentions that aspect, no? So strange that nobody ever mentions this. The Ugandan soldiers who were killed as well. Yeah, we never talk about that. It's like in Beirut, in the 1980s when I think 248 or 49 US Marines died when there was a bomb. It's where they tried to use fuel air explosives. It was massive, and they died. That's a horrible thing. And Ronald Reagan then withdrew them out of Lebanon immediately, out of Beirut, which was wise, which is why he was a good president, despite being an occultist himself. I'll say he was a good president. And how many of you listening to me now, tell me, how many French paratroopers died that day as well? Tell me. Since you know about the US Marines who died, tell me how many? 1, 2? No, 48, I think. Yeah, thousands of them. Thousands of French paratroopers died that day as well. But when you hear these people talk on the radio shows, on TV, YouTube, we lost these things, these US Marines. Never ever say about the French who lost people there as well. You see, you only know half the history, and I'm sure you'll say that to me as well. That's fine. I don't think you can know history fully, but I do think you are dishonoring the memory of those people who died, those men who died, by not even mentioning them. This is like when I think it was US Team, Navy SEAL Team 6, who went in and rescued somebody in Yemen. And in that rescue, they shot dead a South African called Corky, was a teacher in Bloemfontein. He shot him dead because, we were US, we can shoot whatever. Oh, you're so pathetic. So when Obama came out and talked about the rescue, he just said, yeah, we rescued this guy and another hostage died. Yeah. Yeah, you couldn't even give a shite enough to mention the guy's name, huh? Couldn't even say it was a South African. No. Can you understand now why certain people would actually take great offense to the way you speak? Can you understand it? I doubt it, but anyway. But what was very interesting at Entebbe and what is not also discussed is that, but it's in this book for that very reason, is that they also had to destroy the enemy MiG fighters because they had no air superiority there whatsoever. So when they came in with their C-130s and they loaded everybody after the rescue and they flew out, and it wasn't a lot of people were rescued, 94. Then, of course, they could be shot down. And so they had to get rid of the Ugandan Air Force. And there was about 30 of them, MiG-17s and a few MiG-21s. And they destroyed all of them on the ground. This was absolutely crucial. Thirdly, there was one elderly Jewish lady called Dora Bloch. We mentioned this in Codename Wrangler. I spoke about it. She had dual nationality, British and Israeli. She was left behind because she got ill. And then a day later, the Ugandan army officers at Mulago Hospital in Kampala, they actually shot her dead inside the bed. Yeah, she was elderly. She was, I think, about 80 years old. And it took 3 years, actually, up to 1979 to get her body back. So it's pathetic. It's really, I have no words. I can only think of as Tanny, lying in a bed. She's ill with Ugandan military officers, or criminals actually, in uniform. They all arrive and they just kill her. Yeah, just like that. Then they dump a body in a plantation. Yeah, not even a decent burial. No. It's hard work, guys. We write these books in a way which is fun and great to read, and it's not, I suppose, as bloody as it could be. But the real world is very bloody and it's very hard and it's very tough. And it just takes something from you, there's no doubt. And so don't ever get involved. Don't get involved. And also I wanted to speak about the static line jumps. And I described the entire sequence of a static line jump for you in this book. Ironically, as we speak now, it might be out or not on Legacy. We found the entire PT course of 2 courses, one in 86, the old one of 2 weeks, and then the one of 4 days. We found the entire PT course of a parachute battalion in Bloemfontein. We found videos on them, and we got permission to use it, including the hangar phase. So there's going to be 3 episodes on the 14-day PT course. That's first episode. Second one is the 4-day PT course. And it has the same failure rates, by the way, there's no difference. And then the entire hangar course with the first jump. So we're making that in the background so that people can know what these poor paratroopers went through. It's really tough. It's hard. It's very hard. There's a reason why an RSM of Special Forces actually said that he considers the US Navy SEALs to be nothing better than the old parachute battalion. Think about what I just said. Think about it. And then lastly, what I also describe in this book, because I found it fascinating, is the graphite bomb. A graphite bomb is called a blackout bomb or a soft bomb as well. It doesn't really explode to cause damage. What it does is it explodes above power lines, and then there's a dense cloud of thin, chemically treated carbon filaments, and they float down and they cause your power grids to short out. And then there's no electricity flowing, so even if your power stations are still working, you can do a blackout in an area. It is very possible. And you can actually see these things. When I still had the website going, and I don't have anymore because it's just too much money to pay for it and nobody visits. I'm not going to do that anymore. I actually had pictures of all of these things where you could actually see what this thing looks like. And and in this book they drop it there. I think in I'm not sure in which city. They drop it somewhere because there's a raid going on in that suburb and they want it out. So they drop it on it. But in fact, the U.S. Air Force dropped it first, which we know about, in Serbia in May of 1999. It's the first recorded use of it, which we know about. And they got Serbia's power down 70%. The power grid was down 70%, but not for long. It took them less than 24 hours to actually restore it. So what's the use of this weapon? Is it worthwhile? In the long run, unless you keep on repeating it, it might be easier just to bomb a power station, which does not include a nuclear power station, Israel, America, NATO. No. Laws of war say you cannot attack a nuclear power station. Ukraine. Oh yeah, of course, you're attacking that one close to Chernobyl. What? You're attacking that one all the time. Yes. Yeah. Or perhaps not the one at Chernobyl, but yeah, even that one, you had a fake incident there, didn't you? Yeah, you exploded the bomb against it, or you flew a drone into it, and then you tried to blame Russia. Yeah, but you forgot the satellites again. Yeah, as well as the intelligence aircraft flying around. So your own attempt was tracked. Yeah. Now I'm talking about the other one which the Russians captured, and apparently is being attacked all the time. Yeah, clever, eh? What you gonna do when you have a nuclear leakage? What you gonna do? Tell me, please. I'm interested in knowing why you're so stupid. I mean, I just don't get it. I don't get it. And I'm not the only one feeling like that, of course. I mean, I shudder when I start thinking of people attacking a nuclear power plant. Are you insane? But you know what happened in South Africa too? Yeah, I think I mentioned it in this book, where two operatives, white people, comrades, liberals. And good luck for them. They believed in their cause and we respect that. They actually attacked Kuber nuclear station. Do you know that? Yeah. It wasn't operational yet, we say that. But they went and they bombed it. Yeah, they did. And if you know where Kuber is, right next to Cape Town, you would wonder about that. What can I say? At some stage, there was a rumor in South Africa that Kuber is going to explode. And the entire Cape Town, everything up to, I don't know, probably to a Free State would be gone. Or at least a Karoo. I don't know. It's silly beyond belief. I don't see that happening, but they say that's from the Bible. I've never read that. No. But if you know something about it, come and tell me. I would be glad to know more. But I think it's bullshit. So we know that cutting this electricity can also cause serious damage to nuclear plants because they need electricity. It's ironic to keep their water pumps and things flowing so that they can shut down in an emergency. It's very technical. I go into this book, but we saw what happened at Fukushima, which is the one in Japan where an earthquake or a tsunami or something happened, and then the electricity supply was cut and the generators can only run that long. Yeah, it's a major issue. It's a major issue when they lose electricity. Nevertheless, the Americans then used this black bomberwares again during the First and Second Gulf War. We had 85% of Iraq in darkness for a while. But there was a reason behind that which was more sinister. I I think I reveal it in this book as well. I'm not going to give it away to you. And then, of course, there's the favorite Hollywood story, which is called EMP, which is electric magnetic pulse or something, which they say is like a nuclear bomb you explode in space. Yeah, and then it will take down all the satellites and all communications devices. It will be burnt out. The boards will be fried. Will be without any internet, without anything. Anyway, that's what they say. Is that true or is it bullshit? We look at it in this book and like everything in life there's a certain amount of truth in it at a certain time. But these days, most of your electronic military communications anyway is protected against an EMP type of explosion. It's actually called electromagnetic pulse. Yeah, that's what happens when you speak mostly out of memory. But it's fascinating because in 2016, when he was still Vice President Joe Biden, he said that they're going to launch a cyber attack against Russia and China because apparently Russia and China was trying to destabilize the US electricity grid by hacking. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating that you have no evidence of that whatsoever. And then you're bullshitting, and then you start saying that, oh no, we're going to attack these two nuclear powers that's got more military people than you have by far. Yeah, you're going to attack them. Tell me, Joe Biden, and the rest of you who laughed and applauded when he talked that crap. Do you think that such an attack, a cyber attack on a country, might be seen as an act of war? When Israel attacked, and when was it, 13th of June, many months ago now, probably attacked again, I don't know. When they attacked Iran, may I say, without a declaration of war against every act in the book, UN Charter, everything, there's no excuse whatsoever. The same as Pearl Harbor, very much exactly the same. Then they also did cyber attacks, of course, and it apparently worked for a while, where they got the air defense systems a bit down, but not for long, because I understand that Russian and Chinese experts immediately got involved to restore it. Yeah, so that story of having complete freedom of owning the skies above Iran, well, some parts of it, it's a very big country. But all of it, no. Most of your attacks were actually standoff weapons. Almost all of them, standoff weapons. So your air superiority claim, yeah, I doubt that. But we'll see. We'll see in the second and third round. I would love to see you actually take on the S-400, which I understand is going there now, as well as Chinese air defense systems. Yeah, it will be fascinating to see that, because you made very, very sure not to come close to these systems when you were still attacking Syria under Bashar. What was his name? The one who ran away? Yeah, you made very, very sure that you wouldn't come close. I wonder why. Because you'll be shot down. That's why. There's no other reason. You'll be shot down. Anyway, Codename Vet 101. It's a fascinating book. There's a lot of stories happening in it. They did manage to capture this Shulker, by the way. And the Shulker then, in the next book anyway, caused some damage to the aircraft. It's quite interesting what happened further, and then it played a role in the book after as well, Codename Elise, which I still have to talk about. GSSP 40, that's where it... well, you have to read the books yourself, guys, to find out. The story doesn't end here. The book is available in hardcover, softcover, as well as in Kindle, as well as in audio. That's it. That's the story. Codename Vet 101. God bless, and until we meet again.